afternoon. This is Linda Field. I'm the Director of Portfolio Management for the Office of Affordable Housing Preservation, and I'm here to welcome you to the second overview of the RAD closing process. Today's presentation, we hope, will take us further down the road to learning how to appropriately and successfully manage a RAD closing. This is a follow-on to the program that we began in September, and it is probably one of 3 such closing meetings that we hope to hold with you over the next 3 to 6 months as we learn more about the process and as we define the process better. We wanted to get some information out to you before the end of the calendar year, and so we hurried forward to put together those things that we've now learned from the few transactions that have closed and the obstacles that we've needed to work around and the processes that we have needed to build. We hope to have later sessions that will engage our external partners and have them bring those things that they know and they have learned to the table as well. So I want to introduce Beverly Rudman, who is the closing manager and will be doing most of the heavy lifting in this presentation, as I get to kind of be the moderator and just lead us into the process. And we have Patricia Casey, who is not with us today and was going to be a presenter, but who will be available perhaps on the phone line to give us some benefit of specific experience on the closings that we have gotten through thus far. If you would like to ask a question and you registered for the seminar, you will find that you have an audio pin, and there is a slide on the screen right now that will show you how to get into the queue. You can raise your hand by clicking on the icon, or if you're shy, you can type in your question. And I think that we will probably not go immediately to questions, but we'll try to wait till we have some kind of natural break points in the discussion, and we'll stop there for questions. And we have an assistant here who will keep us noticed up as to what's in the queue if we forget to look at the screen and see what's there. We want to talk to you a little bit about the objectives today, and they're fairly narrowly defined in terms of what the whole RAD program is about. We try to make it clear in our invitation that this is going to begin with the issuance of the RCC and talk through only those features that impact closing. What happens after you've already finished your transaction development. So we're going to try to have you become familiar with the key documents. We are going to teach you the who, what, when, and where if you're not already familiar of who is involved in this process. And we're going to look at the 4 different types of closings that we have and probably show you more the similarities than the differences, because even for ourselves we were kind of surprised at how similar they are. They do have a few different features. We will talk about those a little bit. We probably will have a separate session later if necessary on FHA insurance. But our role in the FHA process is limited primarily to accepting the field office approval of the transaction and inserting that into the RAD transaction. So it's a more limited role than we thought we might have had earlier on. We're very comfortable with that, very happy to have that be the case, and we hope that will be comfortable for you as well, since you're probably already familiar with how that works. The next slide that you'll be seeing, our number 4 slide, is our picture of how this process looks once we step into the closing arena. And first of all, Bev, as the closing manager, does all of the intake of the transactions that are ready for an RCC to be issued. As soon as she receives that signed document, She's going to do several things, one of which is to assign it to a closing coordinator. Later, at the very end of this presentation, we have a slide that tells you who all of the closing coordinators are, but how you will know initially who your closing coordinator for a particular transaction will be is that you will get a hello letter in an email that will tell you who she is and will give you some additional information for starting your process. As external stakeholders, you can see who those parties are. You know who those parties are, the PHA, the new owner, lender, and counsel, if you have that. The escrow agent and the internal stakeholders, the team leaders will be involved with the closing coordinators all the way through the final closing process, the transaction managers as well. And so we will be working together to make sure that the transaction stays on track, and if anything changes or there's a need for amendment, that all the parties are engaged in that so we can get the proper approvals in place and make certain that you can move to closing efficiently. We'll also be bringing in the multifamily housing and the PIH staff as needed, and certainly the HUD Field Counsel is very key to all of this. Your HUD Field Counsel will be identified in your hello letter, and we will refer you to HUD Field Counsel for whatever instructions and special directions they have that will get you to closing effectively. The next slide, I believe Bev's going to talk to you about pre-closing events.
Hi everyone. I want to take a step back in this slide and say, although that basically we are focusing today on what happens from the RCC issuance forward, let's just take a step back to say that your contact during the whole period after the CHAP is awarded is your transaction manager, and that's going to be the person who gets you to the approval committee and creates the RCC and sends that RCC to Margaret Salazar to be issued, to be signed. We're calling issuance when HUD signs the RAD Conversion Commitment, and we're calling execution when the outside parties sign. You do have 30 days to execute the RCC, but I would like you to know that once the RCC is signed by HUD, we are starting the closing process, and that is the point when you will have a closing coordinator assigned to the transaction.
Is that the next one?
Yeah. Yeah, I got it. So a lot of people have, from time to time, people have been asking me about approval letters, and I know there are approval letters in other types of HUD programs, but in the RAD program, we don't have a separate approval letter. We have the issuance of the RCC, and at the end when we're ready to close, we will be giving you OGC approval of the documents and closing coordinator approval to close. Where I want to say not formally, there's not a formal approval letter. When Linda talked about the 4 types of transactions, for the closing coordinator, the way that we look at it is it a PBV, is it going to be a PBVAP contract or a PBRA? Because the PBRA has some different requirements that, because it's going to go to multifamily, we need to collect before closing and begin before closing. And then the other thing that matters to us a lot is if it's FHA, going through FHA process, because then clearly we need to coordinate with the field offices that are working on the FHA commitment, or is it non-FHA? So for us, those are the determinants of what we think, what we need to do and where we need to go.
Okay, so then we're repeating just a little bit for you, but the goal for the ideal process with the FHA financing is we have the RAD approval committee and then the RCC issuance, and then the whole transaction goes to the multifamily HUB loan committee for its approval. When it is generated out of that committee, it's assigned both to the RAD closing coordinator, Bev Bev's instruction as the closing manager, and also to a hub multifamily closing coordinator in the jurisdiction where the property is located. Now, our experience thus far with just the handful of transactions that we've managed is that we don't see the multifamily closing coordinator as they're performing their function. We're dealing directly with the HUD field counsel, and so we're assuming that it may be more transparent to us and we may have more engagement with the multifamily closing coordinator as we get more experience. But for right now, this is working well. The handoffs are going smoothly, and we'll allow that to continue unless multifamily advises us that we need a different sort of engagement. I borrowed a slide from George Weidenfeller from Reno Kavanaugh next, and forgive us, George, and I hope next time you'll be here to present with us. But thank you for letting us use it, and we thought that it was very helpful because it allows you to see some similar things that HUD does in comparison to what we are doing in the RAD process. So we're offering this slide, and for those of you who signed this as participants, we're going to be sending you the slide package after the close of the training. We just wanted to point out that although the features are similar, that this is not a PIH-controlled activity, and so the RAD program has some policy determinations that are different from those that are applicable in mixed finance. So as you're working through your transaction, don't be surprised. Your closing coordinator will be able to guide you if there's something unusual that we need to discuss or examine or consider. We have an entire team of policy and transaction management folks available to work on that and work us through it. The next thing that we want to share with you is what we have busily been doing for the last couple of weeks here, trying to capture the steps that we think each of the parties has to go through in order to do all the things that have to be done to get us to closing. And this is kind of maybe our third run at the process, but we've divided it out into the parties, and we've worked through the steps, and we've provided a connectivity that shows you who you're engaging with or who we are engaging with and at what point in time. We thought, hey, we can stick this on a calendar and we can make the days fit, and we'll be able to see when we've got to have X document in a package mailing it to somebody on the West Coast. We're not quite there yet, but the goal is ultimately to also be able to apply this sort of schedule to the to a calendar scenario so that we can be absolutely certain that we aren't missing any deliveries that need to be made. And we were in a meeting, Bev and I, this morning with Sandy Enriquez from PIH, and she said, hey, we'd really like to see this for the entire RAD process, so I'll be recommending to Margaret that maybe we can start at the very beginning of the property coming into RAD and build the additional pieces so we can see the whole flow chart. So stay in touch. In a couple of months, we'll see where we are on that. But that's where we're moving, and we're certainly open to ideas, comments, suggestions that you have that are key to making this work even more smoothly. But we think this is a good start. We hope you'll help us. Beth?
Yes. So there's no test on that at the end, but we will be sending it out. We weren't intending that you could really glean too much from it, but just the idea, the sense that those are the parties, and we are trying to track everything that each different party needs to bring to get this to closing. And so I want to go now to the closing documents. So the total list of documents and things that have to be done, completed before closing, you will find in a closing checklist. We've been working on the closing checklist. We've already gone through a few iterations trying to make it really understandable and to put things into categories that make sense and help everybody understand what has to be done. Those are always, the latest one will always be able to be found at the RAD resource desk. So you can always go there and see it. You don't have to wait for a hello email from the closing coordinator to understand what your draft document package has to include. But for right now, we're going to take a look at some of the key documents here. So of course, we start with the RAD Conversion Commitment, the use, which again has to be executed within 30 days of issuance and prior to closing. We have the RAD Use Agreement, the HAP contract, and the release of the Declaration of Trust. And all of these are going to occur in every closing unless there's some really unusual circumstances. Just to get an idea of why you need a closing coordinator is that we really have a lot of logistics to deal with in getting to closing here, because all of these documents, each of these documents has to be signed by a specific party, and they are not in the same place. All these parties are in different places. So we have the RCC, which is issued in OAP. It's executed, by the owner and transferee if applicable. We have the release of the Declaration of Trust, which is executed in PIH by the Assistant Secretary or Deputy. We have the Use Agreement, which is executed by OAP and then the owner in the closing. And we have the HAP contracts, which for PBRA has to be signed by the HUD Multifamily Director, and in PBV doesn't have a HUD signature. The RCC, okay, so after it's been approved by the committee, it goes to Margaret, it's issued, it gets sent out in PDF to the transaction manager, it gets sent out in paper copy to the owner, and again, it must be executed and returned, because the language in the RCC does say that it terminates after 30 days. And the closing is supposed to be within 90 days of the issuance, but there is language in the RCC that allows us to extend that deadline through an amendment. So the RCC survives closing. It includes the key financing terms and reserve for replacement terms. It identifies the parties, the ownership entity, and any new entity. There'll be information that is included on the repair requirements and the escrow. If there's an escrow that HUD needs to, well, there should always be if there's an escrow, it should tell who the escrow administrator is. There are limited times when we are actually going to be looking for a rehab escrow. It will depend on whether there is rehab requirement and whether or not it's going through LIHTC, or if it's new construction, or if there's lenders involved. So depending on the specific circumstances, you may or may not need to supply to HUD a copy of your rehab escrow agreement, but it will apply in some cases. And your closing coordinator will help you determine whether we need to see that. Any special conditions that are in that are added to the RCC will have to be cleared before closing. The closing coordinator is responsible to make sure that they are all cleared. The RCC also has, after the body, it has 9 exhibits. I feel like these exhibits have been the source of some confusion. What we're trying to do with the exhibits, some of them are explanatory. So Exhibit A gives some instructions. We have B and C, which are giving the form of documents, so that when you execute your RCC, you know what is going to be required of you later. We are not looking for you to fill out a form and sign a HAP contract and put it in before you send it back to us. That is not what we are looking for. What we do want is for the package to go out and come back the same way, just with the additions of the parties' signatures.
Just a minute ago, I heard Beth mention Margaret, and it made me wonder if maybe all of you on the other end of the phone know who we are and what names we go by when people aren't calling us awful things, right? And how the pieces fit together for the RAD activity. And certainly there is a RAD program, but the RAD program is being managed in the Office of Affordable Housing Preservation, and I hope that would be apparent from the invitation. But if not, we want to be sure that you're clear on that. But to make it just as muddy as possible, we are transitioning into the Office of Recapitalization. So you will see our name change from OAP, Office of Affordable Housing Preservation, to the Office of Recapitalization probably in the next 3 to 4 months. And the Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for OAP, and soon to be the Office of Recapitalization, is Margaret Salazar, to whom Bev was referring, who's probably the primary signer of most documents that will come to your attention in this process. PIH is delivering the properties to us. And so the management of the process from issuance of the RCC will be controlled essentially entirely by OAP, certainly with certain inputs like the execution of the release of the Declaration of Trust by PIH, and some management of how we transition units in and out with the PIC, right? Is that correct, Bev?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda, for clarifying that.
Thanks, Bev.
So again, we're looking at the RCC and the exhibits now that you will find attached to it. Again, the closing preparations, there are a lot of descriptions in there about what has to be done before closing. Also work with your closing coordinator if you have any questions, because I just would caution that what's in the RCC exhibit and the way that it's written, that was done, I don't know, 6 months ago or more. And so as we're going through the day-to-day, we may have to, have a little bit of adjustment from what it says and what the reality is, without not saying we're doing what it says, but we might not be doing it exactly in the same way that it's laid out in the Exhibit A. Exhibit B, again, the form of the RAD Use Agreement so that you know what you're going to be asked to sign later. The same with Exhibit C, the form of the RAD HAP contract. Then we have Exhibit D, which is sources and uses. In some, if there's a transaction that is not involving finance, mostly what we would want to see there is if there are funds being used by the property, that they're being used in the appropriate way. If it's a LIHTC or if it's new construction, what we might want to see is just the list of the planned construction events, and that is to have memorialized in the RCC just what is contemplated in the transaction. So Exhibit D, when you receive it, it should be completed by the transaction manager. It should reflect what was approved in your financing plan, and at the end, at closing, whatever's showing there, we'll want a certification that it remains the same. If there's been a change to the figures there, then that would go to the transaction manager, and we would use an amendment just to attach the corrected one, assuming that if generally speaking, if it's something minor, it will be approved at the transaction manager level. If something major comes up at this point, then we might have to go to other levels within our organization. But it would always be handled by an amendment to the RCC. And Exhibit E, key business terms, that is also going to be completed by the transaction manager and part of the RCC that you will receive from us. That basically will lay out the different financing, the terms of that have been approved in the financing plan. And again, at the end, at closing, if there are any changes, we will want to include that in an amendment. Exhibit F is going to also be complete when you get it. It should either say not applicable, or it should list the repairs or the new construction that you are planning to have at the property. Exhibit G would be the list if there's critical repairs, and critical repairs are required to be completed before closing. The way that we will, the evidence that we will require is that you will be certifying that you have completed the critical repairs. So we will need that certification when the critical repairs are complete. You will need to certify that to us, and we have to have that before we can go to closing. We're relying on your certification. This slide contains my two least favorite exhibits. Exhibit H is going to show the form for that discusses the accounts payable for the property. There's been a lot of confusion, even I would say even internally here at HUD up to this point about what's supposed to be on those forms, and we're trying to work through that and make sure that all the transaction managers have the information they need to make sure this is completed. It really should, the idea of knowing whether there are accounts payable that are outstanding on this property, that's what we're trying to get at here, and whether or not they change from the time that the financing plan was arranged until the time of closing. So that's the idea behind, that's the point of Exhibit H, or the forms that are shown to you in Exhibit H. And we should be, from this point forward, these accounts payable certifications, or I don't know if that's the right word, certifications, they should be coming in your connection with the transaction manager. They should be, you should be working on that, and they should be included in the RCC that's issued, and then certification at the end to say that it didn't change, and if it did, again, going through another amendment process. And Exhibit I will show you that there are, so far, I've only seen not applicable. So I haven't had experience going through looking at what would be here on a live deal. So I am told that it will be completed by the transaction manager and that it will list excess obligations that have to be satisfied prior to closing.
For those of you who might not be familiar with the form approval processes within the federal government, when we built our RCC, we were required to put it through the Paperwork Reduction Act process, which then at least initially froze what could be in the document. So we were guessing early on as to how an RCC should read and what it should contain.
Well, I would say we were planning.
We
just may not
planning.
Have, reality may have.
We didn't have the full picture, or we didn't have some of the details defined in the way that things will actually flow. So we know you might be struggling with the RCC and understanding which exhibits to complete and which ones are completed for you. We're going to try to help a little bit with that by putting a cover letter on the RCC that tells you what to expect the TM to have completed for you and what are form documents that we expect you to review and accept the form of when you execute the RCC and return it to us. Those documents will be completed at a later point, and we don't think that that's clear from the way that package looks right now. We are going to have an opportunity to make some amendments to the RCC. We're trying to collect everything we need to do in order to do that comprehensively going forward. So maybe you can look forward, if you have additional transactions coming up, to a little better version of that document later. Okay. And did I not say when we were describing what OAP was that we are a part of multifamily housing? I might not have done that. Someone passed me a note and said, they may not know that you're not PIH, that you're multifamily housing. So for any of you on the line that did not know that, we want to make that clear. This is a pass out of the transaction to the multifamily housing side of HUD.
Well, it looks like we have a few questions.
Let's stop for questions, yes.
Lori Harris.
Lori Harris, are you on the line? Do you have a question for us?
I do. I'm sorry. If it was mentioned that the critical needs must be completed before the closing, does that mean that the capital event or the capital project and the financing associated with that takes place prior to the RAD closing?
No, it's really specifically for any critical repairs that are identified by the physical needs assessment and are written into that exhibit. It will say exactly, it might say, you know, $1,500 to fix the sidewalk for handicapped access, or it might say $1 million to do something. I mean, whatever, but it's going to be in there, and that's the repair that must be completed before closing.
But just so I'm clear, you know, if a project is going through a major, capital event, you know, a LIC-oriented project of $15 million, that project scope has a number of critical repairs, but there's no, obviously, any proceeds or financing available to make those repairs until the transaction closes.
HUD defines critical repairs, as I've been told for the past 22 years, as those that have an immediate impact on health or safety. And I think that's a different definition of critical repairs than the one you're using. Like if you were missing a handrail on a staircase or something like that, that's what appears on your critical repairs list as my understanding of it, and not, you know, our roof is leaking and we're, you know, that's going to be one of the critical repairs for the overall improvement of the property, but not a HUD. Is that the...
I mean, I guess I would say I'm not an expert on it, so when it comes to me, I get the page that says you need the evidence that the $1,500 repair was done, or I had one where they had to make bathrooms handicapped accessible, and that had to be done before. I guess I really can't speak to exactly your question, and I will try to find somebody else who can answer it and get back with you after the presentation.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. I think it's exigent health and safety is the standard for what has to go into critical repairs. How about another question?
I guess one last thing, I would say of the ones we've seen so far, and I think we've had about 20 RCCs issued. I haven't seen anything major listed. I mean, there hasn't been any major money amount showing on the critical repairs list. And there have been LIHTC deals in new construction and gut rehab already that have come through. So for what that's worth, just for experience, it sounds to me like it's not going to be what you're worried about, but we'll get you a better contact to discuss that with.
Who's our next question from? Oh, it's a written question. Is there any reason there can't be an expedited closing process for cases in which there is no debt or tax credits and the PHA will continue as owner? Currently, these very simple cases are lumped in with the more complicated cases and therefore unnecessarily delayed. All that is needed after RCC is for HUD to send the documents to the PHA for execution and return. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, and I would defer to Bev to speak to that.
I do think that it will be quicker to have that kind of case. I don't think it's quite that two-step process. I think there's still some things in between that we'll need to have. We can think about having some kind of, taking a look at our processes and seeing whether there's something different that we could do. But at the moment, I mean, it's still a matter of taking a look at the checklist. I mean, we're not doing anything unnecessary. We're going to look at the checklist. We're going to see what documents need to be collected and certifications, and we're going to review them, and OGC side is going to do the same, and when we're all satisfied, we can go to closing. I think the experience of the properties that have been, or the transactions that have occurred in the last 3 months experienced the learning curve where we were all doing the first ones. Everybody, the lawyers, the OGC attorneys, the closing people, the RAD transaction managers, everybody's getting to their first or second or third closing. And I would say that it's been a little bumpy. And even already in the last 6 weeks, I personally feel that it's gotten a lot smoother, and we really are moving up that learning curve. We really are able to deal with things more expeditiously just in general. So while I don't think there'll be a different process, I do think that if you've experienced something in the last 3 months and you've experienced X number of weeks, I don't think you will find the same experience the next time you have a property come through.
And perhaps you're suggesting something like the green track that they use in the hospital scenario, and we could suggest that. I think we need a little bit more experience under our belt to know what all the variations are. However, I'm inclined to think that Bev is absolutely on point, that those that are the less complex transactions, that once they at least get to our level, to the closing arena, will move more quickly simply because the closing coordinators will be able to go check, 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 check down their closing checklist and push you forward for an earlier date in the closing queue. But do understand that when you suggest a date for closing, that's how we're going to think about trying to slot you in. So you're not going to probably move faster than that date if that's the one you gave us. So you will want to think about what you need and when you think you can be prepared, and then we will work through that process to the extent that we can to try to make that work. It won't always. We won't be able to accommodate that always.
I guess I would want to talk.
Worrying about
I'm just saying that a little bit later I do want to address the whole topic of dates, and I'm not sure we have a bullet point on that, but I think we'll add it in.
Okay.
All right, so any other questions right now?
Okay, we have another question. Could you speak to the language and the reserve replacement terms in the RCC? I don't have an RCC in front of me. Did anybody
brought one yesterday, but not today. It really is just, I think, 2 sentences. One sentence says, this is what the initial deposit to reserve replacement will be, and the next sentence says, this is what your monthly deposit will be. And I think it might say subject to, our helpful assistant is getting to the wording right now.
Okay.
Yes. It's subject to annual increases required by HUD, which I think is meant, which I have been told, is meant to refer to the OCAF increases.
Does that answer your question?
That was a written question, so we hope it will.
But the person cannot.
I don't think they can go on.
Oh, yeah. If you want to raise your hand and have more follow-up, we'll be glad to talk with you on that. But do we have another question, Leanne? We're good now? Okay, we will go back to discussing documents.
Okay. So I think we're on slide 17. Is that what we're on? The use agreement. So just to talk briefly about the use agreement, there is a form for that is an approved form, and basically there's only a few things. There are only a few things to be filled in. The important thing is the owner and the term, and the term is going to be going to be approved by the committee to be between 15 and 20 years, depending on circumstances, and the closing coordinator is going to be checking that the term listed in the use agreement and then also later in the HAP contract is in conformance with the term that was approved in the approval committee for the transaction. It specifies as the affordability and use restrictions on the property, and I guess I skipped a bullet. It's recorded in first position. And again, as in everything else, there could be some reasons why that might not happen, and we would be guided by the OGC, or the OGC attorney will really be guiding that and will give instructions if there's any exception. But generally speaking, the way we think about it is there's the release of the declaration of trust, and then there's the recording of the use agreement. And it is first. Let's see. it's coterminous with the HAP contract. Again, that's the term that I was talking about, the term that's approved with the transaction. So it doesn't go by what a loan term might be. It goes by what the term of the HAP contract and that's approved in committee. And in the use agreement, it's renewable when the HAP is renewed. Okay. So again, then we come to the HAP contract, which again is kind of the point of this whole, the RAD conversion and what you will be having going forward. We do have in RAD two different tracks. There's either the PBRA that's chosen, the project-based rental assistance, or the PBV, project-based vouchers. If you go through with the project-based rental assistance, then you end up in what I generally call multifamily world after the RAD conversion, where you will have an asset manager who will be your contact with HUD and will be following multifamily procedures. And there are a few forms and things that have to be filled out before closing in order to begin that continuing relationship, the management certification and some other things that are, again, you can find all these things listed out in the checklist and also on the RAD resource desk. So the forms for PBRA, we are using this regular, wait, is that right, the PBRA is a RAD-specific HAP contract. And that is, again, you can find that on the resource desk. The PBV, we use the HUD forms as are shown there, 52530A, for new construction. And I guess in mod rehab, it might be the B, but mostly we've been talking about the A. So those, since we are using regular forms for that, we do have a RAD PBV HAP rider that you also must complete, and that becomes part of the HAP contract. When we set these up, what you will do is you will draft, somebody on your team will draft the HAP contracts, and it's really not too much to add in, but there are things like your maintenance plan and some other things on PBRAs, and you have the units, the rent, the type of unit, the rent, the total number of units that you will draft and provide to the closing coordinator, and you will, the closing coordinator can review and see if there are any changes and will ultimately approve that they're ready for execution. They set forth the rights and duties of the parties, and they, again, specify the contract rents. So we do have two different paths for completing the HAPs, and the PBRA, we do need a HUD signature in the multifamily, from the multifamily side for the PBRA contract.
And if you would like to see a sample of the PBV HAP rider, it is on the resource desk.
Right. So our partners here, I mean, as a closing coordinator or closing manager, I do want to say to you that the HUD has a team that's working on these transactions. It's a team approach. We have the closing coordinator. The transaction manager remains involved and has certain responsibilities towards closing, but is also available to the closing coordinator to help and for information. And then we have the OGC Field Counsel. So each transaction, we go through an internal process where a OGC Field Counsel is assigned to the transaction, and again, it works closely with the closing coordinator and the team to move everything towards closing. They're responsible for reviewing the documents they're responsible for reviewing. We can go over briefly here, but there's the title, what they're ensuring the clean title and the proper recording order. They ensure the legal description consistent with the survey, the leases, and the loan documents. And I do want to stress that title and survey work is something that can hold up a closing when things don't match. And we have already, in just our handful of closings, we've already found squirrely things with legal descriptions that have to be addressed. It's, it's not going to stop things from moving forward, but it may be a hurdle or an obstacle that has to be overcome to figure out what to do to get there.
We do have a question about the survey. If we could go to that. Is a survey required for non-financial deals?
Yes, it's always required because it connects in with the legal description, and the legal description's on the use agreement.
And remember, we told you earlier that the closing coordinator will be sending a hello letter when he or she is first assigned your transaction, and that will identify the HUD field counsel that you will be working with, so you will know who to contact to find out how to deliver those documents.
But let me just add that if you're asking if a new survey is required, I think the answer to that is no. If it's a non-financial transaction and you have a survey, that's what we want to look at. It's not that we're asking for a new one.
That's my understanding as well. Thanks, Beth.
Light bulb. Okay. So organizational documents, again, the closing coordinator is not a legal expert and is not a subject matter expert on organizational documents. So it's the HUD counsel that's going to review those, and that's about all I can say on that. We also will have, there might be subordination agreements that need to be reviewed, releases of existing debt. There's special documents that have to be prepared when there's been a previous mixed finance transaction. And then we have the opinion of Owner's Counsel. Again, OGC, the Office of General Counsel at HUD, has a form document that I believe they provide as a draft example. And then I know that in various transactions, I know that sometimes there are things in the opinions that create a lot of back and forth. I don't really know what they are. I just know that that is something that has to be worked through. Then we have the release of the Declaration of Trust. That is to be drafted by the outside attorney, whether it's the PH attorney or whoever is going to do that, but that comes to the OGC Counsel for OGC Counsel to review. And then we have the RAD Use Agreement, which is the form that comes from us and goes to you for you to fill in. Again, pretty much that review is pretty much about the legal description for the OGC Counsel, and then again it has to have the proper owner name and term.
And as we're trying to be certain that the field counsel are prepared and comfortable in moving these transactions forward, OGC at HUD headquarters is beginning to engage prior to the approval committee so that they are familiar with the transaction and can give some guidance as to some features of the structure that I think then will assist all of you and certainly us in getting the approval that we need from the OGC Field Counsel in order to move forward.
Okay, so I just want to now address this last thing on the slide here about an escrow letter. What we found when we got to the first two closings is that because it's not a table closing, there was a little bit of a chicken and an egg question. Are we signing our organizational documents, but you haven't signed the RAD? We're not really closed on the RAD part of the transaction. How are we doing this? So what we have been doing, and it has been working very well so far, is to, when we are ready, when everything is ready and all the forms of the documents have been agreed to and the certifications have been drafted and approved, and every other organizational document, subordination document, all those things have been approved and reviewed, both either and or whatever from the closing coordinator side and from the legal side. Then what we've been doing is we've had HUD execute all the documents, and we give an escrow letter that says, here are the, and we've given it to law firms or title companies. I don't think it would go to the PHA. Here are these executed documents from HUD. They can be completed when you have all these other signed documents, and then you can record. So it's trying to address the chicken and egg problem by saying HUD is going to sign first and provide you with the documents, but also with instructions that all these other things must happen for the closing and recording to occur. We even have that you're going to get these documents and they may come from different places because, again, for example, the HAP contract may come from a different place than anything else. Okay, so here we have another list. I mean, a little bit of this is repetitive from earlier, but this is an example of what the documents are going to be that we will need to collect as supporting documents for the transaction as we're going through this. The first thing on this list is an RCC amendment. It says from the TM, which we use to say transaction manager. The transaction manager is responsible for drafting when we need an RCC amendment. RCC amendments have arisen for a number of reasons. There could be something in the RCC that was incorrectly filled out, something that maybe something was listed or something was listed but it should have been not applicable in an exhibit, or sources and uses changed, so we want to attach a new sources and uses. There have also been some major ones where, for some reason, the rents were not listed correctly in the RCC, which we hope will never happen again, but it did happen once. And we use the RCC amendment to correct that. Now, in general, our approach is that when we find things, or it even, well, let me start again. When we find things that need to be amended, we're just keeping a list. And the general approach is we'll have everything on one final amendment, which will come to you with the closing documents to be signed at that time. However, if there is something fundamental and needs to be done, we can also do an RCC amendment at any point. And if you need an amendment in order, if there's something incorrect or something in the RCC where there needs to be an amendment done at the same time as the initial RCC is signed, we are able to handle that as well.
So we're differentiating housekeeping items from something that might keep a financial transaction from moving forward or something of that nature.
Yeah. Was there a question?
Yeah, Michael Weaver, do you have a question?
Yes. The question is regarding project-based. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Project-based vouchers, new construction with low-income housing tax credits and mixed financing. Our question is, when can the PHA execute the AHAP?
Okay, there's not an AHAP here. There's only a chat. We have Greg Byrne, who just joined us, and perhaps Greg could add a little clarity here.
Right. So under RAD, we chose not to adopt the AHAP model. The CHAP somewhat sort of takes the place of what you'd find in a normal PBV world where you have an AHAP or in the old Section 8 new construction program. So when we issue the CHAP, we're saying we're going to go to closing, and at closing, we close the loan and the tax credit transaction, all that, and then you can proceed to construction. But you are now officially in a HAP. But at the first of the next month, you're under the Section 8 program, even though construction is beginning. Does that answer the question for you?
Kind of. Let me ask this more directly, okay?
Okay.
We are in a situation where we are doing relocation, demolition to be followed by new construction. So when under the regular PBV rules, the AHAP is what triggers the allowable work. In other words, if you have to do rehabilitation, you can't start anything until AHAP is issued. What is the equivalent?
So in our case, that the RCC, we sign the RCC, which says we're good with your deal. You're now going to close within 90 days, and as soon as you close, you can start construction, and you're under a HAP at that moment.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So that's
That's all the contract, to close with the tax credits, that's all they need?
Yep, close everything at once.
Other questions, Leanne? No? Kat?
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the amendments. We have the HAP contracts, and again, all of these documents are listed on the closing checklist. The sources and uses or settlement statement, depending on the type of transaction, there'll be one that's in the RCC, and then at the end, when we get to closing, that needs to be updated. If it needs to be updated, then we need to do that. We have a consolidated owner certification, and I want to talk about that for just a minute. So in the RCC, there's a lot of requirement for certifying certain things. It has to do with having insurance. It has to do with following applicable rules for construction. There were several of these, and when we were looking at them and thinking about the closing process, it seemed to make sense to try to create a consolidated certification so that everybody understands you can just do this in one document and sign to it. Now this document, this consolidated certification, is not something that went through Paperwork Reduction Act. It is not a formal form with an OMB number. It's just something we're using to make things simpler in our view. And it can and should be tailored for your specific transaction. So, for example, if there's a special condition that requires you to certify to something or other, you can add that to the consolidated certification list. We've set one up. It's on the closing. It's on the RAD resource desk, which is radresource.net. And we have been trying to improve that as well over the last few weeks. We've added a couple things to it. There are certain things you check if it applies to you. And again, I do want to encourage you to make that fit your transaction and your responsibilities. So if there is going to be a new owner and the current owner or the PHA is going to be certifying for things that happened up till closing, and the new owner is going to certify for things that have to happen after closing, you can either split it up, or I've seen where somebody put in owner certifies that blah, transferee certifies this other thing, and you have both sign the same piece of paper. Again, we're trying to make it so that it's usable and can go smoothly. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay too. But you can definitely use that form and make it work for you. That's the idea. Evidence of execution of new leases. Greg, would you want to discuss the lease aspect?
Yeah, so
thank you.
This is something with the leases that probably we didn't spend enough time with PHAs sort of making them aware of, notifying them that when you leave the public housing program, you're leaving the public housing lease. And you're either going to have a PBRA lease, which is in the PBRA world it's called a model lease, or it's going to be a PBV lease. And although we had to muddle through the first couple transactions, that what we really want to see by the time we come to closing is that you've got all your tenants on the respective new lease. Again, whether it's PBRA or a PBV lease. And so we just want to see evidence of that, because we don't want really for you to have a HAP contract that's going to start the first of next month and you don't have leases that fit the program. So just something to plan ahead for.
So the leases, the new leases they would enter into would also be effective the first day of the month following closing.
Right.
That's the idea.
You're not recertifying the families, but they need to be on the new lease.
Is there a question then?
Okay. The first is, why does there have to be execution of new leases before closing? And I think Greg has addressed that in that you're no longer in the same program and you need to have the right lease documents in place in order to be ready to go forward with your new rents for the first month after closing.
Now there's a second part to that question, which is a good one, which is how do you do a lease a lease is sort of tied possibly to the ownership of the project. I don't know on that. It might be, I mean, if the project is sort of offering you this lease, I don't know if it has to be in the name of the owner or it's the name of the project, but we'll go back and give that a little bit more thought on our side.
Might need to include both the PHA and the new owner as their interests appear, and so that you're covered for both. But we will investigate that, and we will, by the next time we talk, we will have something published on that.
Good.
If you have a need before that time, call Beth, and we'll investigate it.
The next question is, executing the new lease with residents while the closing date is floating presents an issue. How have others addressed this?
Well, I guess I would say we haven't addressed it very well yet, because the whole idea of needing them before closing is something we just hadn't gotten to until we got into the process. And the first closing was in September, and we've only had, I would say, 7 up to right now. So I'm not sure we have any good examples to provide at this point.
So it might be something, again, that we'll follow up after this call. We'll kick it around our team, kick it around with some of the PHAs that have closed and how they sort of stumbled through or struggled with this. So,
yeah.
Good question. We'll get back to it.
Is that it for now?
Is there another?
One more question. Can there be amendments to the new lease? So you have to abide by the program to which you're going into. So under PBRA, there is a model lease. There's no such thing as an amendment to a model lease. There's house rules, but essentially the PBRA model lease is the model lease, and you're not allowed to put, now you can ask for certain provisions formally. You can ask the HUD office for changes of it, but you have to get HUD approval of that.
So would that go through the project manager?
Yeah, go back to the project manager, right. Wouldn't go through the RAD office, the project manager. Yeah, and certainly there are notice requirements to the tenants. Under PBV, there is no model lease. So it's either, you're essentially, there are certain, in the PBV program, there are certain mandatory items that you put as a rider to whatever the owner is using for a lease that sort of really ties it to a Section 8 subsidy scheme. But it acknowledges in the voucher program that owners have different leases. It doesn't force people, everyone, to use in the voucher program the same lease. So you have more ability to provide amendments as long as they don't contradict the model clauses that you're required to use in the PDV program.
And I would add that the lease rider that is required, there's a requirement for a lease rider in PBV, and just yesterday we posted a sample, right, on the RAD Resource Desk. Oh, sorry. Later today. It will be by the end of this week. There will be one up on the RAD Resource Desk.
Right. So there's both in the PBV program generally. There's a rider that you put on any Section 8 voucher or project-based voucher lease, and then on top of that, there's a few paragraphs we need for RAD in the PBV program, and we've crafted a suggested rider that you would use that we'll be putting on the website today.
Okay, we have 2 hands raised, and the first question comes from Ken Pyle. Ken, could you go ahead with your question?
Yes, we're using the RAD PBV option, and it was our understanding that the HAP does not begin until the first day of the following calendar year. Are you still required to do the leases at or prior to closing?
So even though, so let's say you have a June 15th closing, and so therefore the HAP will be effective July 1st. We're gonna weave a couple things going on here. So what happens is under RAD, for your first calendar year, the remaining of that calendar year when you convert, whether it's PBV or PBRA, you really are converting into whatever program you're converting into. It's just that the funding to support that contract is coming out of the public housing account for the balance of that year. So yes, you've converted. You are in the the PBV or PBRA program, but the funding for that project is coming from the public housing account that the PHA has been paid for that project. So it will only be at the beginning of the next calendar year that you now fully divorce yourself from being sort of channeled through the public housing account to the project, and instead you'll get your payments directly through either the voucher program or through the PBRA program. So even though that sort of staggered nature way the funding will move to the project, as of the first of the month following closing, you are in those two programs, and that's why we want you to have leases. And but as we've noted, because this is a new program and this wasn't something we had sort of given a lot of thought to before, we've muddled through a little bit these first couple transactions. We're going to give a little bit more thought after this call and see if we can give some better instruction about how to put people on these new leases, given that the closing dates sometimes are hard to nail down.
But I would say also that we do know about the 30-day notice requirements, no matter which direction you're going, PBV or PBRA, and we are trying to make sure that everybody understands that and is aware of that, no matter how we try to figure out what really should be in the lease or how you deal with the new ownership.
Right. And so the PHA, the residents today have a provision in their lease that says you terminate my lease, or if you're making a major change, you got to give me 30 days notice. So PHA should do that. Some PHAs have done for the first transactions is given tenants the notice, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that the lease is going to be effective in just 30 days. It's changed. It could be in 60, 90, 120. So they're saying over the next 9 months you may get a new lease or something like that. So they're taking advantage of the 30-day. We're giving you at least 30 days notice if things change.
Do we have another hand raised?
Paula Rhodes.
Paula Rhodes,
yes.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. We have a situation where we are doing a rehab, a substantial rehab, and we're moving tenants, 184 units in 14 buildings. We're moving them, sort of emptying one building at a time. By the time we close this transaction, we'll probably be halfway through vacating the property, but it's likely to take into March to get all of the tenants out. So in the interim, we're in a PBV conversion. In the interim, do we amend the leases at the site just to add the PBV rider to the existing lease?
We're thinking.
Yeah.
For a second.
Yeah, so you're fully out of the public housing program at the time of closing. And,
right.
And they are sort of in this sort of odd situation where the tenants are in the property, but it's not the final property you're going to be putting them into. And
correct.
So should they be under a PBV lease during that period?
I think on the PBRA side we had a specific discussion that said yes, we do.
Yeah, so we think, Paula, that the similar situations happen in PBRA. We said, yeah, you should be under that appropriate program lease, even though they're going to eventually move to the final project. But let's add it to the queue today of things we need to clarify and send instructions to everybody who's on this call. So give us a couple days to kind of walk this through. Thanks, Paula.
Okay,
I'm actually wondering if you might give us, till next year. I don't know if at this particular date, a couple days might not be enough because
right now, getting enough people together to have a discussion is beginning to be problematic.
Yeah, so as fast as we can. Thanks.
Right.
Understood.
But we know that it's very critical, and the whole conversation about leases and requirements is certainly very critical, and it's on the top of our list. I just want to be realistic here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. Do we have a third caller with a hand raised? David Nash. All right, David Nash.
Hi, this is Dave Nash. I had a question about the PBV riders, whether it would be possible for us to draft a lease that essentially included the terms of both riders rather than having a fairly complicated document for people to understand with, sort of a standard lease. And
sounds reasonable to us, David. I don't think there's any problem with that.
Okay. And then the other question.
Could I just say one thing about that? I think the only thing that I would ask is that would be helpful for the closing coordinator if there was some kind, when you send in the HAP draft, to kind of point us to how you have dealt with it so that we can be comfortable reviewing it. Yeah, okay? That would be my request.
Can you still hear
We
me?
need a cover letter explaining that. Is that what you have in mind?
Yeah, I'm saying if there's 2 paragraphs that have to be included and you've included them and they're on page 7, you know, that's where you'll find them. That would be helpful to us.
Okay.
Because if it's in the rider, we just look at the rider. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, wait a minute. I just want to say, now I'm thinking, I'm getting confused again. I do this again. It's not the HAP, it's the lease.
Right,
but we are looking at the lease riders. So in this case, I think we would want to look at the lease,
right.
And you would say...
Your instruction's still valid.
Yes, okay, good.
Yeah. Sorry for the confusion, David. Yep, we're good. Thanks, David.
Okay.
I hate when I confuse myself. It's bad enough when other people confuse me.
And I think maybe we have another call in the queue. Okay, Amy Martinez. Amy, do you have a question for us?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
A little bit louder if you can.
Sorry about that. I do have a question for you guys. We are also PBRA vouchers, and we have 3 different cities which we are going to be doing relo in all 3. And if we're putting them, I know we have to do the issuances of the new leases, but if we're issuing vouchers to some of our tenants, I'm also wondering, do we have to do the new leases to a voucher and then also the PBRA model lease, and then the Section 8 vouchers also? I mean, that's going to have them on 2 different leases at the same time?
Right. So I think, Amy, we're all looking at each other like we know that we would be tongue-tied if we tried to tackle that right now on the call. Could you do us a favor and send us, kind of map that out in an email and just send it to the RAD at HUD.gov, and that will give us a better chance to sort of put our arms around it and stuff, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have written questions we need to look at? Lots of questions. Okay. Do you think maybe we should get through the rest of the slides first, if you wouldn't mind holding folks out there, since we control this and we can give you a hard time. Let us get through the rest of the slides, and we have a lot of questions in the queue, and we'll come back and take any of those.
We don't have too much further to go. I know you guys don't have the slide deck, but there's just a few more pages. So just to finish out this page, the release of the Declaration of Trust, we're just talking again through the documents. So, of course, each of these is going to be specific and has to be drafted by your counsel and sent into OGC for review. And if there's discussion, there's discussion. But generally, it shouldn't be too hard of too difficult of a process. And then the OGC is also requiring a certification of no changes to documents, again, before closing. Evidence of fidelity bond coverage, that is only applicable in non-FHA PBV conversions, where we're non-FHA PBRA conversions. I'll get that right one of these days. The top 5 things listed on this slide only apply to PBRA, and the evidence of fidelity bond coverage is listed in Exhibit A. It says if applicable, but it doesn't tell you when it's applicable. So at some point,
the comparison chart, yeah, maybe we could just go to that. Do we have that document? All right. So we've got a document that we've just put up for you that might actually be a little bit.
Is that on the RAD website now? Is that on the RAD research? No.
No.
So we could put it there.
We haven't published it, but we can push it out with the slide deck. But this also will allow you to sort it into the 4
Scroll
categories.
down just a little bit, you'll see the evidence of fidelity bond coverage and those forms and agreements that we were discussing that only show up in the PBRA column. The evidence of satisfaction of RCC special conditions, again, that's going to depend on what the special conditions are, and the closing coordinator is responsible for making sure that those occur. There's anything, let's see, rehab escrow deposit agreement. Again, these last few things are the rehab escrow deposit agreement, the general depository agreement, and the previous participation approval, that's if applicable. I don't know if that I want to talk too much about them right now. Want to move forward to the next slide?
Sure.
And again, I just want to, we want to say about this again that there's a requirement in the closing document package to send in copies of all of these documents that would have been part of your financing plan. The reason is for a final review by the transaction manager to make sure that the plan that is provided to us in the closing package matches the plan that was approved in the earlier stage of the conversion process. Okay, this slide we're talking about what happens after closing, just very briefly, and I will say that we've just sort of gotten up to having closings and being after closings, and we're trying to develop what exactly our process will be and have it written out and published, but we haven't done that yet. So right now what we absolutely have to have immediately after closing is a PDF of the signed HAP contract and the signed use agreements. And other documents that were signed at closing, we just need, are we talking here, Linda, was your idea about PDFs of these?
Yes. Absolutely.
PDF of the documents that were signed at the closing, and recorded documents can follow when they're available. And again, I apologize that we aren't up to being able to say, here's our rules and here's our process, but we're just not up to that, and we will get there.
Although I think you will probably benefit from the fact that we're trying to pare this down to just what we need to have. And so we're going to try to limit the docket requirements, and we're spending some time trying to think through what's essential and what we'll need to hold in a docket here in OAP. Thank you. And the last bullet on this page, I do want to emphasize that after closing there is another step, and that is that it has to do with the HUD system and removing the units from the ACC by going into the PIC. And we are now requiring a certification at closing that says that you will do this, because that is critical. It might not be critical to you, but it's critical to HUD. Yeah, we can't emphasize that enough. That's
once the closing is over, wait one more day, do the PIC removal, and then celebrate, because then you're really done. Here we have some resources, and again, I want to remind you that we will send out a slide deck to you later today, and you'll have all this so you don't have to scribble notes down now.
And then the last page is our closing team with Bev at the top of the list and all the closing coordinators, and I've managed not to put my name on that list. Certainly, your question cycles for how to finish the process after the execution, or at least the issuance of the RCC, should begin with Bev or with your closing coordinator if that person has already been assigned.
And I'm planning to be working most of next week, so it might be a good time if you want to call and talk about anything.
Should be a quiet time.
Should be quiet, I'm hoping.
Right. The questions that we don't get through in the queue today, they
right.
can ask you next week. All right. Okay, so now we're back to questions, so let's open that queue back up and see what else we have. Okay, we have a written question. In a previous document, it was stated in a footnote that the reporting requirements to HUD for RAD converted PHAs are under development. Is there an ETA on those requirements?
So on these reporting requirements, do you mean year-end financial statements, or what? Because if you convert to PBRA, I assume this is post-closing, because we've just gone through all the closing requirements. If it's post-closing and you go to PBRA, you're like any other PBRA property, which means you submit annual financial statements. But if you go to PBV, there are no financial statements that you submit. So I hope that clarifies it, but if someone wants to send a follow-up note, that'd be fine.
Okay.
So remember what is it, RAD at HUD.gov. RAD at HUD.gov is where you can send questions, right, afterwards. or at any point. We always monitor that. It's monitored 24/7 almost.
And we have a sleepy person here to attest to that. Next question. It is my understanding that PHA EBCCs must be used, but the drawdown is to be treated as if it were half.
ELOCs.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's ELOCs.
Understanding that the ELOC system, which is how you get your funds, must be used, but the drawdown is to be treated the same as if it were half. So I think this may go, I'm assuming this goes back to our original question or question a couple of minutes ago about in the first year, you're just getting through that year, getting funded through whatever that public housing project was getting funded under the public housing account. You've converted, but you're using the public housing account to fund the project.
Right, but I think it might be a different line item in LOCs than it was previously, right?
There's a different line item for both operating and capital funds that you'll use once you convert. You'll report on a new line item, but
I think it's the same process.
Yeah.
For that first year.
Right. Okay, go next one.
So is it going to be a new account number, or do we know?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's just a different line item. That's my understanding.
Right. Somehow I thought we had put instructions on that, but we'll go back and find it.
Okay, I'm not the expert on that. I just was present when it was discussed, so I hope I'm right about that.
Okay. Another question? Greg, you're closer to the screen. Maybe you can tell ELOCs from EBCC for me.
So our inventory has been removed from PIC. Will this have any effect on our capital funds and operating subsidy in the calendar year we convert? Yes. This PHA, if you're one that has already received a CHAP from us, you should send me an email because if the project's been removed, it's problematic if a project's been removed from PIC. You really can't convert. We say in the notice that if you've received a CHAP and you've been approved for demolition, we'll let you go ahead and demolish the property while you've received the CHAP, but we'll suspend the removal from PIC sort of tag in PIC so that the project can still be recorded as receiving sort of funding in our system. But if you're putting in an application today and you've not received a word from us and the project's already demolished, no, that's not eligible for the program. So it has to be something really still in the ground. But for that person who sent the email or sent the question, please follow up with an email to me if you need more information. gregory.a.byrne@hud.gov.
Maybe we can add Greg's, let's add Greg's email address to the slide deck before we send it out.
Hey, we're actually just gone through the written ones. Okay. We're going to look once more to see if there's any other hands raised.
Good. Wow. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope that we provided some initial information that is news you can use, and that by the next time we meet, we'll all have a bit more experience, and we'll have refined this a bit so that it's easier for you.
And again, Linda and Bev will be sending this stuff out this afternoon.
We will.
Yep.
We'll be
right.
sending out the slide deck as discussed, and the questions should go to, say again,
rad@hud.gov.
All right.
Good.
Thank you all.
Oh, we have one last question, and that'll be it. Robert Faircloth.
Yes, this is Robert Faircloth in Savannah.
Hello.
Hey, Robert.
Hi there.
How are you guys? I hate to grab you in the middle of this presentation because I know this one's more about closing, but I've been trying to get a question answered for a couple of days related to the portfolio application.
Yeah. Hey, Robert. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll give you a call back on that within about the next half hour as soon as I get through this meeting. Is that okay? I've got your question. I apologize that I haven't been able to get back to you.
And that'd be perfectly fine.
Great. Right. Thanks, Robert.
All right. With that, we will close the meeting, and to be continued at a later point. I'm sort of thinking about the last week of February for the next session. So if you'll look at your calendars, we'll try to get something out to you as soon as possible in the new year about dates for a follow-up session.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.